This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, and Super Inframan. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight, joining me, I have Red Pill Junkie.
Delighted to be here.
And we're going to be talking with Mr. Seth Breedlove about his latest project on the Trail of UFOs. Hey, Seth.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been too long. We were just figuring out how long it's been. It's been way too long.
I'm glad, though, that the last time I was on, I was talking about Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, because that still remains like one of my favorite STM projects. So it's in fact, like last night we were interviewing Stan Gordon. We talked to Stan Gordon last night for like an hour, just because that whole Chestnut Ridge like weirdness stuff, that's still some of my favorite cases. Like I always like to dive back into that area.
Okay, definitely. I mean, it's so high strangeness.
Yeah. Oh, it's gotten real. I mean, it's always been real weird, but it's gotten real weird in the last year. Like Stan last night was telling us these stories about like stick figure men or something. I mean, it was insanity. There's always like some crazy story. A couple years ago, I was with him in Kentucky, and we were having breakfast together, and you know, I try to keep it like fairly mundane, like normal life stuff when you're with people, because I find that like most of those people that are into this stuff, they don't want to talk about it, you know, just sitting down for dinner or whatever. And so like Stan and I are sitting there for breakfast at the hotel buffet. And I was like, so how are things? And he just launches into this story, and he's like, well, let me tell you, about a couple weeks ago, this creature with no head was seen up on the Chestnut Ridge, and goes into this whole story about this cop seeing this creature with no head. So I think Stan like lives and breathes high strangeness.
That, you know, I'm fine with that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
So with this, you have Shannon LeGros doing the narration for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that come about?
Shannon and I worked together. Well, let me start at the beginning. Shannon and I met in like 2014 at a town hall meeting taping for Finding Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. Which is, as you do, you go to a town hall meeting for Finding Bigfoot that we both happened to be at, and that's like how we met. And she happened to live in Ohio for a short period of time, so like we met during that period of time where she lived here, and we hit it off. So we've been pals, you know, for like a few years now, and we text and stuff all the time, and we had talked about her being involved in an STM project, but there was never like a natural way to get her into one of the films. And when I decided to do On the Trail of Bigfoot, I thought it would be sort of the perfect opportunity to bring her in, because her forte is more as like a story, you know, someone that collects stories. Mm-hmm. And so like she didn't necessarily fit into a lot of the like Midwestern or Southern, you know, monster stories we were telling. So when I got to Bigfoot, I was like, oh, good, this is like a good opportunity to bring her in. So we flew her in for like a day and a half. She was here for less than like 48 hours. And we did filming in down in Adams County, Ohio, with this Ohio Bigfoot hunting group called the Ohio Night Stalkers. And we had a blast, and the whole time we were filming, I kept saying, I'd love to get you involved in like the next series, whatever we do next with On the Trail of, and have you be the storyteller. Mostly because like I hate being on camera, and On the Trail of Bigfoot was like me. It was, you know, I was on camera and I was narrating and stuff, and I have a have a face for podcasting, and so like I it was I just asked her like, would you want to do that? And she said yes. So that's how it came about. It was pretty much then, and then like throughout the year leading up to that. Well, actually, that would have been, we shot the Adams County thing last mid-December, and by our first shoot for On the Trail of UFO was in July. So we had talked throughout the few months in between those two shoots, and sort of had a goal in mind of what we wanted to do and how to approach the series. I knew I didn't want to approach it in the exact same way I did On the Trail of Bigfoot, because that was like a very, very personal project, and this was going to be a little bit bigger than On the Trail of Bigfoot. So I wanted her to be the storyteller. I wanted it to have her perspective on things and her approach to it. So that's pretty much how we got to Shannon leading the charge for me. Also, Shannon's a lot tougher than I am, so I knew like having her taking the reins would probably be safer for all of us.
Safer how?
Oh, she's legitimately like she's a tough chick. Like she'll when we go on shoots, we're often in places that are not exactly safe.
I see.
And we're a bunch of like city boys, from like Midwestern Ohio, and none of us are armed. None of us carry a knife or anything. So with Shannon, it was nice because you just felt like, well, if something happens, she'll kill whatever or whoever, and we don't have to worry about it. So like it became, I'm not really exaggerating here either. I mean, it really, at some point it started to feel like she was the bodyguard for Small Town Monsters. Like nice. we were in this group, we were in this like East Coast leg of the trip, that went through like 14 states or something. And, you just felt like even though she was horribly ill by that point, she would protect us if the need arose.
That's awesome.
Were there any moments in which you guys actually feared for your safety during the filming of the series?
I would say there were a couple like kind of sketchy moments. One would have been when we were at Area 51, which is not. It's more, honestly, the Area 51 thing is more just because of the mystique of the place. Like you're convinced you're going to get shot by a sniper at any minute while you're there, just in general. And it was also that the means in which we arrived at Area 51 was super shady on our part. We showed up, we met these guys on the extraterrestrial highway, maybe like an hour outside of Rachel, and they happened to be in the exact same rental car we had, and for some reason we thought it would be a good idea to convoy in to Area 51. So it was like these two identical unmarked cars driving into Area 51, and it was on the same day that the Storm Area 51 thing really exploded in the media. I mean, it was all over the radio, all over the internet, TV, everything. And so we showed up there with what probably looked extremely suspicious, because it was two identical cars, tinted windows, and it was probably a very not terribly smart way to arrive at the gates of Area 51. So that was like one thing where I guess, like it felt scary. I don't know if it actually was, but it felt scary. And some of the locations we were at in like the White Mountains and even like Sedona, like we hiked up pretty far in Sedona, and it was there were like scorpions. We saw scorpions. Which I'm telling you guys about that, and you're probably just laughing at me, but no, not me. I'm from Midwest Ohio. There's nothing in Ohio that wants to kill you. It's like the tamest place on earth. But yeah, there were scorpions and all that kind of stuff. So just being out at night in that area. I mean, honestly, on the Trail of Bigfoot, when I shot that, there were multiple events during the filming of that where I felt like I could die at any minute. This was a little more tame than that one.
Well, I also thoroughly enjoyed you repeatedly filming the no filming this area at the Area 51 gate.
I thought what would have been hilarious would have been to drone, like launch my drone right in front of the no drone sign. You know,
see how long it takes to get shot down.
Yeah.
Did you share with anyone that you were planning to go to Area 51 at that particular day?
No, not yeah, I'm lying. Actually, what happened is we were on the drive to Area 51 from Sedona, and it's like a 5-hour drive, and we're driving to Area 51, and one of the guys in the car thought it would be a fun idea to launch a Facebook Live and talk, and I think he literally set up the title of the video as driving to Area 51, and because of that, it got shared in the Storm Area 51 Facebook event page, and before we knew what was happening, there were 400 and some thousand people watching the live feed, and like, but the best part of this was it was solely trolls. Like, it was only people trolling us. So yeah, I guess people knew we were on our way. Yeah, but other than that, like, we didn't share any specifics about when we were going or any of that kind of stuff.
I mean, the reason I ask, and putting my tinfoil hat on for a minute, the fact that those two guys with the same type of car you had rented happened to be there, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'll escort you to that place." I don't know, or maybe they were instructed to like tell you, that you weren't doing any funny business.
I don't know. We interviewed the one guy. The one guy is actually in episode 5. And there's more to his interview that I would have liked to have gotten in there. He told a story about he was supposedly stationed at like RAF Bentwaters at one point. And he told some really, really interesting stories about his past and like his own sighting. He saw what he thought was a UFO when he was a kid. That was unconnected to the military stuff, but he was also a little scatterbrained, but I think that might have also been because he was so pumped up to be at Area 51.
Right. So doing the series versus doing a single movie, how is it different for you?
Yeah, I mean, just in the filming, it's incredibly different because it's funny. The format itself isn't what really separates On the Trail from like the films. It's how I don't want to say laid back because the shoots are not laid back at all, but it is like in terms of like how we are shooting, it's much more laid back than the movies. The movies there's a crew, a pretty good sized crew, and the ultimate goal is to shoot something that looks like it is cinema, like to make really high quality independent film. That's the ultimate goal. And that's great. And it's I think we're making really high quality stuff. I'm really proud of what we've done, but it also kind of, in terms of the production, it can kind of not ruin it, but it kind of like drains some of the fun out of it because you're spending, I'm not exaggerating. We can spend like an hour or 2 hours on a lighting setup for an interview, and it's like early on when we first started making movies, it was run and gun. It was like grab your camera and stick it in someone's face and shoot and let them talk. And, it's that like indie aesthetic, grassroots kind of stuff. And I missed it. And that's why we started doing On the Trail of, honestly, like that was the actual impetus for On the Trail of, was like, let's get back to like just going out. And our first On the Trail of series was On the Trail of Champ, and I didn't direct that one, but I produced it. And the guy that directed it, Alexander Pedikov, his entire crew bailed on him the week he was supposed to go film, and he ended up shooting the entire 5-episode miniseries by himself. And I loved it. Like, I loved the idea that he just went out and did it by himself. So that's what I did with On the Trail of Bigfoot, was like, I just took my camera, whatever I had, and I went out and filmed. Well, with On the Trail of UFOs, I wanted to do that. I wanted to still have that like aesthetic, but I wanted to get, more people involved in the filming. So there were larger crews at times on the shoot, although for like the Sedona and Phoenix and all that stuff, that was just me shooting. But it was pretty much just the way we approach it is totally different. We use the cameras we have and what we have at the time, which tends to be my Sony A7S, and then like a handy cam, iPhone is in there, GoPro. It's kind of whatever we have. Mm-hmm. And we don't really have the opportunity to mess around with lighting setups and all that kind of stuff. And it isn't just that I hate lighting setups, because I do. It's that just the nature of what we're doing and the speed at which we're trying to accomplish this doesn't allow for it. Like On the Trail of UFOs was shot in probably somewhere around like 25 days. We conducted 30 interviews and multiple night ops, and we shot across multiple states. And so you don't have time to like set up these crazy lighting setups and all that kind of stuff. So just the way we approach it from a production standpoint is totally different. And then the way we approach the edit is very different. And I find that it's really exciting as a storyteller. Like, that's what I consider myself more so than like a filmmaker. I tell stories, and it just happens that I'm doing it in a visual way. Mm-hmm. I love it. It's almost like returning to, I started out in newspaper reporting. I did freelance newspaper writing, and that's what this feels like in some ways to me. It's like getting back to the roots of how I originally told stories. And you're trying to tell these really intricate stories, but in a way that's really simple and quick, and you're in and out. There's a beginning to the story and an end to the story, and it's done in 30 minutes, as opposed to the films which are an hour and 15, something like that. This is like I'm trying to tell a succinct story. I don't think that was the proper pronunciation of that word, but I'm trying to tell a story in a complete story in a very short period of time. And that aspect of the episodic storytelling is what I really love. And it presents like insane challenges. I have a whiteboard at my office that I have to constantly go to. And it might not seem, I'm sure when you're watching the episodes, it probably doesn't seem like it would be complicated in any way. Especially because, it's not like we're doing a deep dive into, really out there stuff in the series. This is kind of supposed to be, at least in part, an introduction to ufology for newbies. Which
it does very, very well.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. But yeah, I think I'm kind of yammering on here. I just think the difference is it's a return to what we were when we started out. It's scaled back from a production standpoint. And it ends up being mostly me doing the storytelling. There isn't a lot of, input from other people and stuff like that. It really was, and so blame me for anything that's wrong, because it really comes down to me in the edit, and then hopefully I get a little feedback after an episode is done or whatever.
I was just gonna say something based on what you just said, and I forgot what it was now. It does kind of go across a wide variety of stuff in this 8 episodes, right?
Yeah.
And you cover a little bit of everything, and I think that was fantastic, because if someone's coming into this and they don't have a huge background on this stuff, you touch on almost all the major points.
Yeah, and what was fun about that, so I don't know if either of you guys have seen On the Trail of Bigfoot, but it's similar in some ways. It's, it's a 6-episode series and it's taking you through the phenomenon, but it's doing it in a chronological format, at least for the first 4 episodes. And in that series, everything's chronological. It begins with exactly what you would expect. The native traditions, the Ape Canyon story, and then Ostman and all that stuff, and then it walks up through like the 70s the 50s and introduces like John Green and Renee DeHinden and all of those guys. And then it moves through. So it's all very chronological, and I knew coming into this, I did not want to do that at all. I didn't want it to be chronologically told. I wanted each episode to be about a topic, and then we're going to, that topic might be explained chronologically within the context of that episode, but more often than not, it really wasn't. The one episode where I felt like we did sort of chronologically go through things was episode 2, the Changing Face, the episode with the craft descriptions and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it's also important to note that none of us, especially Shannon or I, consider ourselves UFO experts or UFO or even UFO people. I've always loved the UFO topic, and it's interesting. In some ways, UFOs were there for me before Bigfoot, which is kind of what I'm most often associated with. But UFOs was something I really loved when I was younger. And having said that, this, we are outsiders looking in on ufology rather than insiders looking out. And so maybe that sets it apart a little bit from some of the other stuff out there. I hope, anyway. Well, I hope it doesn't drive people that are into this stuff nuts.
I think that that played very well in your favor. The fact that neither you nor Shannon, like you said, very steeped in the UFO field, which comprises, mainly on 2 camps. The hardcore skeptics or the true believers. And that is one of the things that I appreciated the most of On the Trail of UFOs, that it remained pleasantly agnostic, not trying to convince the audience either or, that, UFOs are real and they are like alien ships coming to Earth, or no, UFOs, well, it's this modern myth that has taken a hold of contemporary society, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
I felt an honest exploration of what does it mean to have an ongoing UFO presence in our society that, like you said in the episode 2, keeps on changing its phase, from the will-o'-the-wisps to the airships to the flying saucers of the 40s and 50s. Then we go to the black triangles, the boomerangs, and then we went to the lights in the skies, and now we're having this idea of the Tic Tacs, although I haven't seen any, civilian reports describing Tic Tac shaped UFOs yet. Yeah. But anyway, my idea is that I felt the outsider taking a glimpse into this the UFO phenomenon in itself, and ufology as a societal or as a social phenomenon, I felt was a fresh approach.
Cool. And it's that's always the goal too. That agnostic thing is, weirdly enough, that is something that we hear a lot from people who normally. So I think I've actually told Seriah this before, but my wife's grandpa George is like a hunter, and he's been out in the woods his whole life, and he thinks the idea of Bigfoot is he does not in any way believe in Bigfoot, right? He's been out in the woods, he's never seen it, doesn't think it's there, but he's fascinated by the idea. And so whenever I make a movie or a mini series, I always have that kind of like mindset, his mindset in my head, because I think that's the bulk of people out there. You know, they might on the surface think these subjects are kind of stupid or silly, but there's a part of them that wants that to be real or is just fascinated by it. Mm-hmm. And I think what a lot of paranormal content, the problem they run into is they're either trying to debunk it or they're coming at it with some sort of mandate already in place. Like they've got an agenda, and that just is not the way that I think you're going to win over an audience. And so that's what we always try to come at it with like that mindset, the same mindset that I have. And I think Shannon's, more of a believer in this stuff than I am, but that's the mindset we bring to it.
And I think the fact that you are not, huge into UFOs is what makes it such a good series, because you're coming from that like sort of novice perspective, making a series, introducing people to the subject. So you're not taking anything for granted.
Right. Yeah. And this was a lot easier to pull that off too, because like with Bigfoot, it's not that I know everything about it, but I did 150 episodes of a podcast about it. I made like multiple movies about it. I did, when I first got into all this, I used to collect newspaper archival reports about Bigfoot and post those online and stuff. I did a blog. So I had a lot more, there was more knowledge about the Bigfoot subject. And with this, it was easier for me to approach it with open eyes, with like wide, I mean, the other that bugged me about the whole project when it was over was Shannon and I had all these really in-depth discussions about how we wanted to get back to a sort of like wide-eyed optimism about UFOs. And whatever that means, I don't necessarily think that there's a message there of like, these are our space brothers or something like that. But if you think back to like the earliest days of UFO research and guys like Jacques Vallée, I think they came at it with more of like an innocence than we might have about it today. And we talked about like wanting the sort of like theme of the series to be that we wanted people to look to the skies again. And I think we get that a little bit, but we shifted. We started to shift because we noticed just in general and just in conversations we were having with each other that what we actually wanted the focus of the series to be was putting the focus back on people. And so like that became the message. So originally it was like going to be this like look to the skies with open eyes kind of thing. And it parallel, we ended up, changing that to more of the like put the focus back on the people. And part of the reason we did that was there's been an explosion of paranormal content in the last 2 years, a lot of it around the Travel Channel. And, like those shows are, I guess they're fine. They're all the same.
Right.
Like, they're all identical to one another. And none of them are actually about the witnesses, and if they are, the witness is really just a tool, to create a scary moment on a show. So like our thing was, get the focus back on people. And part of that was because of Greg Bishop, like we had this great interview with Greg Bishop that ran like 3 hours because friggin' planes kept flying over our house, and we had to keep stopping the cameras during the middle of his interview. But he kept talking about the people being the most important part. And I think that was also part of what shifted the focus of the series, was because I had already edited episode 2 before we shot Greg's interview. So the first episode completed was episode 2, and episode 2 isn't really about that overall theme. It doesn't get too deep into the overall theme of the series. And episode 1, which is where we were going to introduce this is what the show is about. Obviously it's about UFOs, but it's also going to be about something. And it was originally going to be about, wide-eyed optimism and getting back to looking to the skies for answers and that kind of stuff. And I think it shifted heavily after we interviewed Greg Bishop, and Shannon and I had these conversations about the witnesses and the the investigators, and it's worth noting, like, the shoot, you see that final episode of On the Trail of UFOs where Shannon and I had the talk up by Griffith Observatory with LA sprawled out behind us. And she talks about that, like how the subject affected people. So all of that, like, just helped sort of change the whole mission, I guess, of the series. I don't know what you asked me. I started rambling about whatever I just rambled about.
You mentioned Greg Bishop, who is, it's no secret that Greg is one of my best friends in this field.
Awesome.
And I wanted to ask you, one of the questions is, how did you choose all the people that you were going to interview for this project? Because, and again, for the sake of a transparency, and it's one of the reasons why I gave you the thumbs up in my review of the series for the Daily Grail. Some of them happen to be good friends of mine. David Weatherly, Micah. I'm also in good terms with Ryan Sprague. So I wanted to ask you, how did you choose who to interview in the series? Yeah,
I mean, this started with On the Trail of Bigfoot. And probably On the Trail of Champ even, but the bulk of and I feel like I'm just going to keep ragging on other paranormal stuff, so bear with me. I really hate most of the paranormal stuff out there. I mean, like, that's just being completely open with you. Like, that is how I feel about it. So a lot of our stuff is a response to the television and the content that's out there. I'm not talking about indie stuff. I'm good with all the indie stuff, dude. I'm talking more about, like, what the major networks do. And they go for, like, the same set of talking heads. And I'm also not ragging on those people, because I'm sure there's a lot of good people involved in that. And some of the people that are in this series are on some of those shows. But we went for people who I felt would be able to speak with authority and gravity and add something to the series beyond just catchy phrases. We talked to we've interviewed so many people. I mean, after this series, we're up to, like, almost 200 interviews conducted by STM in 5 years across the projects that we've done. And you do interview people who talk about these subjects frequently, and you can tell that all they're kind of doing is repeating a phrase that they've said before, because it's like a cold talking point or whatever. And that's fine, but, like, that isn't what I wanted with this series. I wanted it to feel natural and real, and like we were interviewing real people, because we are. So, we picked people that have been involved in this, either for investigators who have been involved in it for a long time, or who have a reason for why they've recently got into, whatever it is, like, whatever the thing is that got us to talk to them. But the most important thing was that they were authentic. So the people that we interviewed, I think across the board, everyone in this thing is an authentic person, someone that's a real person. And I loved you mentioned David Weatherly. Like, Weatherly's interview, probably, as far as content, it's my favorite in the series. Now, my favorite sit down interview was Ryan Sprague, because it was so chill. I was completely exhausted by the time we got to New York, because I was sick. Shannon and I both got sick during the East Coast leg of filming, and I was in, like, the throes of it by the time we got to New York City. And so being able to just sit down with Ryan at a table and talk for, like, 2 hours or whatever was really nice for me. Like, it was relaxing for me. And it was a really relaxed conversation. So that was my favorite interview. But I do, if it wasn't for the stupid airplanes, Greg Bishop's interview probably would have been my favorite, because I really loved where we were sitting and, like, just talking to him and hearing him talk about, Greg was not what I expected either, by the way. Like, as I said, I've always been into these subjects, not always, but I've been into UFOs for a long time. And when I used to work medical billing, all I did at my job was listen to podcasts, and Radio Mysterioso used to be one of the shows that I listened to. And so I knew Greg through that show. And it's funny, I always pictured Greg, and I've seen Mirage Men and all that stuff, and I always pictured Greg more as like a, I don't know why, because I mean, once you meet him, it's so silly that this is the way I picture him. But I thought he was going to be like sort of a not a conspiracy theorist, and maybe be a little like cold and detached. And I told him, like, I messaged him a few weeks ago, and I said, you are the heart of the show. Like, you're the one that supplies the heart and emotion. And it's true. Like, the things he kept going. There were times during his interview where I think I got emotional because I could see how passionate he was about what he was talking about. And I just didn't, I guess that wasn't the Greg Bishop I expected. I expected a Greg Bishop who was like going to talk about the military cover-ups and disinfo campaigns and stuff like that. And it's funny because like he almost pushed those questions away. Like he didn't really want to go too deep into it. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm sure you guys know that about him, but that for me was like a cool moment because I didn't know that would be the way his interview went at all. In fact, that's why I saved that's why I didn't finish editing episode 1. We planned, I kid you not, we planned this LA trip late in the game. It was in November. It was after I had already edited episode 2, and we planned it. At least 70% of doing this trip was so I could interview Greg Bishop because I needed him for the first episode. But the way he ended up being used in the first episode was not at all the way I planned on using him. I planned on using him as the guy who was going to come in and really like blow TTSA out of the water and like, like go off on like TTSA tangents and like talk about, and instead he's the guy that's like very rationally sort of explaining things and how everyone's up in arms at each other over it in the UFO community and things like that. So I mean, I honestly couldn't be happier with the people we interviewed in this. I really loved Linda Zimmerman is one that we used a lot. She came up throughout the entire series over and over. And, I was really pumped to get to interview her because I bought her Hudson, the Hudson Valley UFO stuff's always fascinated me. It's been ever since I saw the Unsolved Mysteries episode, that delved into the Hudson Valley stuff. I have been fascinated by those stories, and I also love the Hudson Valley. We actually went on a family vacation to the Hudson Valley last year and went to like the real Sleepy Hollow, and all that kind of stuff. And it's everything I wanted it to be. And so getting to go back there and interview her for the series and everything was really cool. And there were, the people that took us out at night in the woods with them or whatever we did. Everyone that was involved in the series was really cool. Ron Regier, he doesn't seem to be someone that a lot of people are aware of, but he had some really cool insight on, on the subject. And it was all these little surprises like that. They kept popping up throughout the filming of the entire thing. And you can't make something like this. I mean, you can make something like this, but if you make something like this and you either get people who are not going to be as engaging, or you can't get people and you end up just sticking yourself on camera the whole time. I mean, these people make or break the entire series. So we lucked out.
So walking away from it, how are your views of the UFO phenomena different from before?
Someone asked me that a couple of weeks ago, and the way they asked it sort of perfectly describes how I feel about it. They asked, "Do you feel like you know more about the UFO topic now or less than you did when you came into it?" And it's definitely like less. It's yes. not even a question. There's definitely less because I came into it thinking I had a pretty good handle on things, and thinking, okay, well, it's like 70% of it's like military craft, and like 30% is something else, and then there's a bunch of stuff I don't know, and I came out of it thinking I have no idea. I don't understand any of it. Like, I don't know what any of it is. Like, was the Phoenix Lights flares, or was it a mile wide triangular craft? And it's like, and then Greg Bishop, sort of in that first episode says it doesn't matter. like you can spend all this time, like really analyzing the data and like trying thinking about the craft and like the stories and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's the people that mattered. And I think that, like, especially, what's funny is, like, in a way, the series probably looks kind of quaint now because of like how much the world changed just between when we just between like when I finished that first episode in like December and where we are today. Like you're seeing clips of like Putin and Trump and like, the Middle East bombs and stuff. And I mean, that stuff's all happening, but it seems like the world's changed a lot, for the worse since we made it. So in a way, I think it might almost seem like people might watch this and get some nostalgia out of it. But the thing about it that's so timely is that it's about people, and if like there's ever been a time where we needed to be focused on other people and helping other people and caring about other people, it's like right now.
So, I'm sure that in December there were a lot of people who thought that UFO disclosure was just around the corner. And obviously that's like the least thing in anybody's mind right now. But what are your thoughts about that whole movement and that whole thing that I don't want to say it started with TTSA, but it was certainly revamped or rekindled out of the New York Times article that was published in December of 2017. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, it got me reinvested in UFOs somewhat, because I think if nothing else, I'd gotten it had all become a little stagnant. Having said that, obviously the negatives probably outweigh the positives at this point. If nothing else, the amount of now I deleted my Twitter when COVID started rampaging around, because I was going to have a nervous breakdown. Like, everyone just wanted to tell you that we were all about to die. And so I had to delete my Twitter. But I know like UFO Twitter prior to the coronavirus outbreak was horrendous. Like, I don't know how else you can put it. It was people devouring one another over TTSA, and there was just constant warring back and forth about it. And so that in itself seems to be a negative that, at least in terms of the community, far outweighs the positive. But it's brought in a whole new group of people to UFOs too. I mean, there's no denying it. There are people that are interested in UFOs now who never cared, about it prior to all of that. And I don't know if it is because it's funny, because if you listen to DeLong tell it, it's almost like he's saying that young people are getting into UFOs because Tom DeLong is into it.
Right.
That to me like makes no sense, because Tom DeLong's not young, and he doesn't appeal he doesn't appeal to young people. Like, he's not.
He did in the 90s.
Right. Like, ask a 18-year-old today who Tom DeLong is. They probably don't know. So like, I don't quite get that part of it, but I do think that he brought in tons of people. Like, there's a whole new audience that are I call it audience, but like, there's a whole new group of people that are invested in UFOs and interested in UFOs because of all of that, hitting the mainstream. Suddenly it became okay to be interested in the subject and not, maybe not get the same level of scoffery that came with it before.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's positives and negatives, and I don't know if one outweighs the other or not. It seems like within the UFO world itself, it's been a negative just because of the way people have turned on each other. But maybe that doesn't matter, like, because in the grand scheme of things, the UFO community is probably not going to be the and I'm not, you guys can completely disagree with me on this, but I've always felt this way about Bigfoot and UFOs and paranormal and all that stuff. I don't think at the end of the day it's going to be the UFO community that solves the mystery, if the mystery is ever solved.
Yes.
So
yeah, I agree completely.
Well, maybe the whole point of the TTSA was to disrupt the UFO community.
Yeah, it was maybe by design that they chose to do this. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll answer that like Greg Bishop would and just say, well, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
There's I don't know, like when you're doing the Phoenix Light things, one of the things I had her on, what's her name that you interviewed?
Lynn Kitai.
Lynn
Kitai, yeah. And she was great when I had her on. I guess one of the things I didn't realize is that the Phoenix lights were first picked up outside of Area 51. And to me, that's kind of like, well, then wouldn't that suggest it came from Area 51? Right. Doesn't that lend credence to maybe it being a test craft of some sorts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was one of the really exciting little tidbits that are thrown into the series that some people are going to completely miss because it's just kind of like stated so matter of factly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Lynn says it. I know Ron is the one that
yes.
Ron literally saw it on the radar or whatever. Mm-hmm. And his claim is that they picked it up over Area 51. And that does kind of ring true because there are reports of people seeing the thing in Vegas.
Right.
So there was this, it supposedly went on this path that was first picked up near Area 51. But yeah, I mean, it's the Phoenix Lights is so interesting because everyone we talked to had their own story that connected to them to it in some way. And every one of those people had their own theory about what it was. Like there were a ton of people who believe it's some sort of like, what is it, like a floating platform or something, like a platform, right. Like a troop transport kind of thing is what we heard. A bunch of that. We heard a lot of people still going with like it was flares thing. And then there's people that believe this was a mile-wide craft, piloted by extraterrestrials. I mean, there were people, there are people that believe it was, orbs that were somehow connected by an energy field. So, everyone has an opinion on the Phoenix Lights, and I don't. So like this is one of those things where I've watched like the videos that exist to me almost do look like flares because they're in like this perfect pattern or whatever, but they look somewhat like a flare to me. But mm-hmm. I'm also not closed off to it being something else because of how many people saw these things and that so many of the people have a similar description of what they saw with like this huge craft going overhead.
I think when it comes to this stuff, you have you definitely have misidentifications of normal things. You have stuff the government has that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. But there's so many genuinely puzzling accounts that go back throughout our history mm-hmm. that you can't say there's not a phenomena,
Right.
And
that's the one thing you can come away from UFOs with. It's funny because with Bigfoot, it's like, I'm sorry, I keep talking about Bigfoot. It's all right. It's a weird obsession. But with like Bigfoot, the question is, are they there at all? Like, do these things exist? Is something there that people are seeing or isn't there? With UFOs, there's no question UFOs are real. It's like, what is a UFO? Like how do you define that and what are they to begin with?
Right. And I think there's a lot of answers to that question.
Sure, and maybe the most important question is not what are they, but why are they here?
Yeah.
You know, people don't ask why is Bigfoot in the forest, but people do ask why is the UFO just hovering or flying near military bases or encountering Navy fighter jets.
Yeah.
And of course, that also, to me, sometimes suggests that it's test stuff, you know? Like, it's our government testing it up against people who would be able to identify it normally, you know?
I think a lot of it is. Like, I think so many of the stories we heard had that, like, military element. Even, like, the Betty and Barney Hill story, you know, has some weird, like, potential to be like a really dark like military experiment or something, and I think some of that is why this subject is so is let me think of how to put it. It's become a very
murky.
Yeah, murky, but also just like people really view UFOs as like a spooky subject, like ghosts. And I think there's so much more to it. But I think that the reason so many people do view it in that way, in that light, is because of it's because of that more so than like the potential that it's like aliens or whatever. There's the potential that this is our own government messing with us.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sure none of us believe that could ever be the case.
and like I said, though, I mean, we have accounts that go back before our government existed, before anyone had this technology, so we know there's weird stuff out there. But
we have that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, telling it apart nowadays from like what's anomalous and what's actual technology we just aren't aware of is damn near impossible.
Yeah, sure. And we always like to fantasize that either it's all coming from the government, or in this case, well, the U.S. government, or that the U.S. government somehow has all the answers, and people like Greg Bishop and myself tend to suspect that one of the reasons why there's been a cover-up, you know, from the powers that be, from official institutions, is because they don't really know what the hell is going on.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
They are as dumbfounded as we are, maybe even more so. Like you said, Seth, that after you finished this project, you felt that you knew less about UFOs. Imagine those people who probably have access to more information than us, you know, better videos than us. Maybe they are even more clueless than us because of that.
Yeah. It's the best thing about UFOs is, to me anyway, as a storyteller, is we could mine this particular subject for like 50 seasons and not really run out of subject matter. You know, like Bigfoot, I'm doing it on the Trail of Bigfoot 2, and I had to come up with like a whole new way of sort of approaching that. Like, how are we going to do that? Because the first season took you through the phenomenon, and it did it in a pretty concise way. You know, like there's obviously things we could still expand on, but for the most part, we touched on kind of all the major touchstones of Bigfootdom. But with UFOs in 8 episodes at 35 minutes a pop, you will not do that. Like you won't hit all those things. And so like you could do season after season that was told in pretty much the same way as this one, maybe expanding. The one thing I would want to do a little bit more with like a season 2 would be to expand more on the smaller stories that I used almost as bookends in this season, you know, like Exeter and things like that we just spent a couple minutes on to sort of like set up the subject that we're going to explore in the episode. Because especially something like Exeter, I love that story. Like that's one of my
for people who don't know, why don't you tell people a brief bit about it?
Yeah. In some year, sorry, my dates and everything right now are completely screwed up because I'm editing Mothman Legacy, and like it's got me thinking in like 30 different directions at once. But at some point in time, near the village of Exeter, New Hampshire, which by the way is where Joe Hill lives, who is a great writer. He wrote a comic book series called Lock and Key that I adore. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. This guy was walking. I can't even think of names. Do either of you remember his name?
No.
No, not right now.
I don't either. It's in the episode. Please watch the episode. It's great. He was walking home from visiting his. This is my favorite part of the story. From visiting his girlfriends, and he was walking home from visiting his girlfriends, and he basically saw this strange blinking, object, light in the sky, come across the sky and stop and hover. It ended up like swooping at him. He freaked out, goes back to the village of Exeter and reports it to the police. So him and at least two other police officers go back out to the location, and they all witnessed the same thing. So they all witnessed the craft there. They all experienced seeing this thing. And one of my favorite aspects of it was that there were other people that claimed to see something similar around the same time. So there were these two women driving the same stretch of road earlier in the evening who had actually called into the police station, reported the same thing. Like they saw this strange red light in the sky. It kind of chased them. And, but yeah, it's funny. I'm a terrible storyteller when it comes time to like tell these, like what's supposed to be like the spooky story. I'm not a spooky storyteller. And, but having said that, like what I love about Exeter is it really calls back to Dan Weiss's story. Dan is the guy that we interviewed in episode 1 of On the Trail of UFOs. And like he was out with his sisters for a walk, and they see this strange object in the sky or light in the sky. It goes down behind some trees, and it really there's a cool parallel between the Exeter story and Dan's story. And like I always thought I really wish I could remember the Exeter guy's name. It's driving me bonkers that I cannot think of it right now. But like I always thought that I might have some kind of insight into how that witness felt just from talking to Dan about his encounter, because the encounters were so similar, the sightings were so similar that I bet that guy asked himself every day, like for the rest of his life, what that thing was. Was
it Norman?
Norman Mascarella. Thank you. Yes, that's it. There it is. Norman Mascarella. So yeah, I just thought, I had something happen to me when we were making On the Trail of Bigfoot. Something threw rocks and screamed at me in the middle of the night. When I was in the middle of nowhere, in the mountains in Oklahoma, and I replay that scream and the rock throw. I replay it in my head sometimes, just because I want to know. Like I want to know what I experienced that night, and also just it was a cool thing. Like it was a really neat thing that happened to me, and I wonder if like that doesn't seem to be necessarily how Dan and Norman responded to it, but I can at least I understand how that one event affected them has affected them all their lives. Dan's obviously a lot younger. Norman died, I think, in the 80s. If I might be wrong, but I remember he was interviewed, because we talk about it in the episode during the narration of episode 4. Shannon talks about how Norman was interviewed by a local paper, and that was actually a school paper had interviewed him, and the kid had asked him what he thinks he experienced that night, and he said he didn't know, which I love, by the way. Like I love that Norman hadn't gotten to the point where he was trying to convince everyone that he saw an alien craft or,
right.
Contacted extraterrestrials that night. He didn't know what it was. And, but it was interesting that even, so late in life, he was still sort of haunted is the wrong word, but it's just there. It's part of who he is. And I thought that was a neat little like insight into who he was and how that event affected him. And it was it was almost like a bookend for Dan's sighting, here's another one, but it's a few decades before.
So when it comes to your Bigfoot or what you experienced there with the scream and the rock throw, the thing I always point out is that's poltergeist phenomena. Yeah,
I think you've said that.
Yeah,
I've heard you say that. Yeah, it was like the only thing is. So I know that I'm probably alone in this camp on the show, but I'm still in the like undiscovered ape camp. That's where I stand on Bigfoot.
You know what? I'm not totally against that, but I think there might be more than one thing going on.
Oh, I definitely think there's more than one thing going on. But
there may be an undiscovered ape and something mimicking the undiscovered ape that's more paranormal.
Yeah. No, I definitely, like, when you look at something like the Chestnut Ridge, it kind of calls all that into question. You have to definitely start thinking in other directions. But what I experienced that night was the reason I replay it is we experienced a lot in a very short period of time. We were in a place called Area X that's a 2.5 hour drive into what is essentially like an inland rainforest in the Ouachita Mountains in, weirdly enough, Oklahoma. It is as densely forested area as I've ever been. And we were a 2.5 hour drive from any major road. Any paved road. It's only 9 miles, but it's the worst 9 miles of road you've ever been on in your life. I talked to he got mad at me because I screwed this up the last time I told the story, but he's British military. I formerly said he was a paratrooper, and I think I was wrong, and he got mad, or I might have said he might be a paratrooper, and I said he was special forces. It's one of those two. But he told me that the only road he's ever been on that is as bad as the road into Area X is a road he was once on in the Congo. And like, that's the kind of like thing, that's how this is. It's this insane road down into the middle of nowhere, and there's no people anywhere. You're on private property that is massive in scope, and everything in this place wants to kill you. The rattlesnakes have adapted to the point that they no longer have rattles. You do not hear them coming. They will just murder you. And there's black bears, there's wild boar, there's everything down in this forest. And so we had been in there for 2 days and experienced all sorts of stuff. Like a couple hours into being in there, one of the guys in the group had sighted in a what he said was a Bigfoot on his scope of his rifle. And like that was my introduction to Area X, and it just got crazier from there. And then on the last night, I had a horrible migraine headache. I'd had a headache. I have migraines pretty much all the time, but especially when I'm filming, and especially if it's hot. And it was 90 plus degrees, and we were in an inland rainforest where there was no wind. So like we were just sitting in sweltering heat for 2 days. So I had this horrible migraine. It was like 2 a.m. I had just gone to bed, and I was just about to fall asleep when there was this a rock throw. It was, wait, let me think. See, I can't, now I'm telling the story, I can't remember if the rock throw came first or the scream, but so it started out, the scream's the most interesting part of this, because it was it sounded like an Apache war whoop from a John Wayne movie, like the stereotype, like just big, powerful whoop. And then it became this bizarre, like, laughter. But like the closest thing we could find to it the next day was by looking on YouTube was gibbon. Like it sounded like a really man-sized gibbon. So like laughing, on this hill, and it blasted the side of this metal building with a rock that crashed into it so loud it sounded like a gunshot went off. It echoed all around the valley. And there were, if you watch On the Trail of Bigfoot, which is free right now on Amazon Prime, so I'm not even trying to, actually it's free on YouTube. Go on YouTube and watch it.
Oh.
You've got like 2 weeks to watch it though, because some of the stuff is going to get pulled down because this is one of the titles we signed over to 1091. But once we also, I filmed eye shine, like very clear, some creature with eye shine watching us from a hill. And it looks like a face. Like, it's really an interesting bit of footage. And I'm not a guy that likes movies where people stick in footage of what they claim is Bigfoot, but I had to do it because it's really, it's really intriguing. But we experienced all that. And then, like it was what I keep going back to is that what I experienced didn't seem to be anything paranormal or even, how the big thing right now is like there's these podcasts where they're literally like every episode is about how terrifying Bigfoot is. Like Bigfoot's ripping people's heads off and all this crazy. Well, this was not that. This felt like this sounded like a natural animal in its natural environment doing its thing. What we talked about, Adam and I, the guy that was in the tent with me that night, it sounded like whatever this thing was, it was jazzed that it had hit this building with this rock. And that's why I started laughing. And it just, whatever this thing was, had a personality. And I think that's one of the things that was really interesting for me is I've been into Bigfoot for years. I've never sat down and had a logical conversation about like how would like Sasquatch function in some sort of like family, how would their family groups behave? How would they act? But the next day after this happened, that was all we talked about. It was like, how do you think a family unit functions? And who, like what happens are they rogue? Is there like a rogue male? Like it was very like sort of weird. We're very weird.
So just as you started saying and talking about, Bigfoot in Oklahoma, on my side screen where my email is open, Coast to Coast sent out an email saying multiple Bigfoot sightings reported in Oklahoma.
There it is. They knew.
I was like, okay, it was literally showed up as you were saying those words.
Wow.
When did you see anything when you did the UFO trail stuff? Did you get to see the spook lights or anything like that?
We were really. I'm disappointed. I'm still disappointed that we did not see the Brown Mountain lights, because we went up there and we interviewed Micah, and it was at a point where the conditions were perfect. Like he himself said, these are the conditions we want. And we saw nothing. And everyone told us, like, going into it, you're going to see something. We go up there all the time. They're always there. And we saw nothing. So, during the making of the series, we saw there were two incidents that happened. One is briefly documented in episode 3, and the other is briefly documented in episode 8. Strangely enough, I think the episode 8 one is sort of the most interesting. We were with a lady, Carolyn LaRock, who apparently hated the series. But she, she liked the series. She didn't like episode 8. So she's into like CE5 and the group stuff. And, she was like doing her, the stuff she does to get loosened up so she can like contact the UFOs. And, while she was doing it, something appeared in the sky overhead. Like this white light out of nowhere just appeared in the sky overhead, was there for like 10 seconds. And as we're all trying to see it, one of the guys in our group noticed this amber light shoot across the sky, and behind a ridge across the valley from us, and all of our attention went off the white light and over to the amber light, and none of us saw the amber light other than the one guy. And when we looked back up, the white light was gone. So that was like probably the most interesting thing that happened. but we didn't get abducted or anything like we were hoping. We thought we thought it might happen, but we didn't. Yeah, we didn't look out. I feel like every time I do a show with you too, like we talk about this, and you'll ask me that question, like, did you experience anything? And every time I have the same answer, like, no. Like we saw that, and then we saw a light in the sky over Sedona. That was interesting, but it's also worth mentioning, like there was an airport on the other side of the mesa where this thing disappeared behind. So it could have very easily just been a plane, although our thinking was you would have heard it, because this was not, whatever the light was, it was not far away. When
you were in Sedona, did the area feel different to you?
Everything was different to me because I'd never been to the desert. I'd never been to, I've been to LA, but as far as like that actual like Southwest desert kind of vibe, I'd never got to be in a place like that. So everything was new for me. And it was almost like sensory overload the entire time I was there, because I'd never seen anything as beautiful as those, the red rocks and all that stuff. That stuff blew my mind. And I don't think it felt different in the way the Chestnut Ridge feels different to me. You go to the ridge and there's just something about the area that the minute you're there, you're like, you're not on edge, but you expect something weird to happen. And I didn't get that at all in Sedona, but I did absolutely fall in love with Sedona. Like I would move there in a heartbeat because it is unbelievably gorgeous.
Nice. Well, you said you're signing a deal here to get this better distribution.
Yeah, we're gonna get, so all of these, actually pretty much everything STM's produced other than 5 of the titles are a part of this distribution plan. So there will be a wider release for On the Trail of UFOs that should see it on most major ad-supported platforms, especially. But it'll probably get out there in some other places as well. I'm not positive on when that will take place. But yeah, all the titles are going to get a much wider release. And the most exciting thing about this for us is we're working on The Mothman Legacy, which is the follow-up to the Mothman at Point Pleasant, the movie we made in 2017. That is going to be the first like full-scale STM release where it comes out on many platforms at one time. We've always put out our movies on like a few platforms, whatever we can manage to independently. The Mothman Legacy is going to get, it'll be on iTunes, Google Play, all that stuff at the same time. And that'll be the first time we'll get to see one of our movies treated like a real movie, I guess. like we've always been kind of considered maybe bottom feeders when it comes to the indie film world. So it'll be cool to see one of our titles come out, on all the platforms that people expect to see stuff on.
So what are you hoping to look into with the Mothman Legacy?
We've actually got 6 of our interviews done with that one. And now we're just kind of waiting for the virus to lift so we can get back to filming, because we have a bunch of filming still we have to do on it. But so it begins with basically where the Mothman of Point Pleasant ends. It begins in 1967 and brings you up to present day with a lot of really interesting witness encounter stories. But it's focused entirely on Mothman and Appalachia and sort of Appalachian lore and legend. We've interviewed 5 witnesses so far, so we've already got a pretty good number of witnesses involved in this one, and it's gonna have you probably haven't seen Terror in the Skies yet, have you? The one we did. Okay, yeah, we released that one last year, and that one's like a weird pseudo sequel to The Mothman of Point Pleasant. This one's a direct sequel, but it also is a direct sequel to Terror in the Skies because it kind of picks up a lot of the same thematic things we were dealing with in that movie. And I can just tell you from like working on the rough cut of the beginning of Mothman Legacy, it very much feels like a marriage of Terror in the Skies and the Mothman of Point Pleasant. So it's going to be very cinematic in a whole new way, I think, for us. We're kind of getting away from some of the animation and stuff that had defined a lot of our movies for the last couple years. I think we started doing that with Momo. And it's only going to intensify with this one. It's not going to have the same like hand-drawn animated sequences. I really want to get away from that and go more in like an actual practical effects kind of direction.
Oh, okay.
Maybe some CG in there as well. But I want to be able to shoot and control the way the recreations look. That's the one downside to like handing things over to an animator is once it's in their hands, it's theirs to do with as they want. Right. Chris's stuff was amazing, but I'd get it back and I'd be like, man, I would have loved if this looked slightly less like this, or something like that. So yeah, we're really excited about it, and that will be out in October. I believe that's the plan. It's supposed to be out in October, and it's supposed to premiere at the Mothman Festival.
Nice. That's perfect. So what's included in your distribution deal?
The Flatwoods Monster, the Bray Road Beast, Terror in the Skies, Moma, the Missouri Monster, Bigfoot, On the Trail of Bigfoot. On the Trail of Bigfoot's weird because On the Trail of Bigfoot was shot as an episodic series, like On the Trail of UFOs, but to release it on Amazon, I cut it into 2 movies. So I took the episodes and I kind of like condensed them down into 2 movies. We did that because from a distribution standpoint, we were told by everyone that releasing episodic content on Amazon, you're fighting with all the network stuff and your movies disappear, or your series will disappear. And we might actually be seeing that with UFOs because it hasn't, it definitely didn't take off as big as On the Trail of Bigfoot did. But with On the Trail of Bigfoot, I edited it into 2 movies, and they were called On the Trail of Bigfoot: The Legend and On the Trail of Bigfoot: The Search. So On the Trail of Bigfoot: The Legend and On the Trail of Bigfoot: The Search is what we've signed over to 1091, and then the Mothman Legacy is part of that as well. So it's pretty much everything we've done for the last 3 years.
Okay, that's cool. That's very cool. And
what about any plans for season 2 of On the Trail of UFOs?
Yeah, I have the whole season outlined, season 2. We just have to see how the series performs before I can give it the green light. But it's definitely like this was something that was intended to be a multi-part thing. Like it's supposed to be continuing. So whatever means we find to do that, I will try to make it happen. Like if that means scaling way back on our budget or whatever, we'll figure out a way to do it and make it better than the first season. That's kind of like what we do. We work with what we have and we make it work. Yeah. And so I want to make a season 2. Right now we're just kind of in a holding pattern because of obviously like everyone else, we're in a holding pattern because of the virus and just seeing how the first season performs.
Well, people are home. They should check it out. Is it free on Amazon Prime?
It's not free on Amazon Prime yet. Yeah. No, and I mean I haven't talked about this anywhere, but the reason we signed with the distributor is Amazon just continues to screw creators over, and every year they drop the revenue earned on Amazon Prime, and we're to the point where we're down, I think 70% under what we would have made on Amazon Prime in 2017. Wow. So you've got to, like, at some point you have to look at it realistically and say, we can't do this on our own. And that's basically where we're at. It sucks for me because I'm a control freak, and we've managed to hold control of most of our films this entire time, for 5 years, and that's it's like 14 different projects or something by the end of this year that we'll have done, and I've managed to hold on to it all this time, and but they just put you in a position where you really can't. Your survival is not going to happen if you don't find someone else who can help with the distribution stuff. So I wish we could have relied solely on Amazon, because it 2017 to like late 2018 it was like the golden era for small town monsters. But you got to adapt, and I think that's where we're at now.
Okay. All right. And your website?
smalltownmonsters.com.
Okay. Well, thank you for spending some time with us, Seth. And again, people should definitely check out the series. It's very, very well done. Very enjoyable.
Awesome. Thanks. It was awesome getting to talk to you guys too.
Where Did the Road Go is made possible in part by our awesome patrons. And for those of you pledging $10 or more, an extra special thanks. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Tim, Lindsay Trebet, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Damian Tallman, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, Matthew Sproul, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, James Lattimore, Sam Sheeran, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris is a hot dog a sandwich, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. We talk a little longer with Seth in a Patreon segment. There's a couple Patreon segments that are going to be coming up this week. We're trying to get at least 2 shows a week while we can, and I hope that continues when things go back to normal. I mean, we did have 2 shows a week for a while, and then things got to be a little overwhelming. But everyone who supports us, thank you so much. If you're a patron, thank you. If you're just sharing the show, get us some exposure to new people. That's, that matters a lot to us. I do this because I love talking about this stuff, and I like supporting the people who are investigating this stuff, and of course the people who are interested in it. And we appreciate your support in any way that you can give it. We are looking for more stories, so if you have a weird thing that happened to you, contact us at stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com, and eventually we'll do another listener stories episode. We have a few now since the last episode, but I want to get a little stockpile of them so we can go through a bunch of them in one show and continue doing listener stories shows. And if you want to talk to us about your story, that's cool too. Same thing, stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. I am trying to use this time not only to get more material out to all of you, but also to finish at least one of the 2 books I'm working on. One, of course, I've been talking about for years, literally years at this point, which is about all the different experiences I've had. And I mean, that's at least started. The other one I also started, but the other one is encapsulating a lot of the stuff we've talked about on the show, like the wilderness poltergeist and stuff that I've come up with. But there's a big step further, and I don't want to talk about it until I get it in the book and get it out there for everyone. And it'll probably be it'll probably be a short book, and it'll also be a very cheap book. More that I just want to put all the ideas in one place and get that done. So this quarantine, this shelter at home thing, that's hopefully what I'm going to be working on. I've actually been fairly sick. I don't know if it's COVID-19. I'm not getting tested because I'm dealing with it. But I have symptoms that are compatible with COVID-19, but are not the main symptoms. For the most part, I seem to have gotten over it. I still, as you can probably notice from the last few shows, I still have a cough. That's not going away, but hopefully eventually it will. But most of the other symptoms have subsided, including the very extreme fatigue, which has taken a massive toll on what I've been able to do in the last few weeks. So there have been days where I've literally gotten up and done the show you heard, and then maybe watched a TV show or two and went back to bed because the fatigue was so bad. And that's finally starting to lift. So keep in mind, there's a lot of different symptoms out there. And testing negative doesn't mean you didn't already have it. And the tests aren't that reliable, and there's so much misinformation going on about that. So try to stay safe and try to do something, creative, productive in the time that we're all kind of locked down. I'm going to be trying to set up some other stuff, show-related. I don't want to talk about anything because I'll end up jinxing myself. But yeah, everyone stay well out there. Do the best you can, and hopefully this world will start to return to normal sooner rather than later. I mean, we know it's not going to be overnight, but hopefully the changes for the positive will come sooner rather than later. And I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.